Okay, so let's talk about 1976. You have this seemingly simple task in the Korean demilitarized zone, just trimming a tree. But it escalates, and suddenly it turns into a massive international crisis that brings the entire world right to the brink of war. So the big question is, how on earth did trimming a single tree almost start a war? We're going to break down this absolutely shocking series of events that began with one poplar tree and ended with pretty much everyone holding their breath.
To really get what happened, we need to transport ourselves to one of the most tense, most volatile places on the entire planet, the Joint Security Area, or as it's known, the JSA.
Now, the JSA is basically the flashpoint on the Korean peninsula. It's the one spot where North and South Korean soldiers are literally staring each other down. And right in the middle of it all, back in 1976, stood this one single 100-foot-tall poplar tree.
So, this tree, it wasn't just there for decoration. It was a real, practical problem. You see, during the summer, its leaves got so thick that it completely blocked the view between a UN checkpoint and an observation post. So, pretty straightforward, right? A plan was made to just give it a routine trim.
Okay, fast forward to August 18th. A small UN command work party heads out to prune the tree. Among them are two U.S. Army officers, Captain Arthur Boniface and Lieutenant Mark Barrett.
And this is where things just spiral out of control with terrifying speed. At first, it's all routine. The UNC guys start trimming, but then North Korean soldiers show up, led by a senior lieutenant Pak Chol, and they demand they stop. Captain Boniface? He just ignores them, tells his men to keep working. Pak sends for backup and then gives the order to attack. And just like that, in a brutal assault that lasts only 30 seconds, 2 American officers are dead.
So, why the sudden escalation? Well, the North Koreans came up with a justification. They claimed this tree was sacred, personally planted by their supreme leader, Kim Il-sung. But Captain Boniface, he just wasn't buying it. He dismissed the claim, ordered his men to continue, and then he turned his back on them.
And in response to that, Pak shouted a chilling command: kill the bastards. His soldiers, they picked up the axes that the work party had dropped and just swarmed the Americans. They murdered Captain Boniface and Lieutenant Barrett in an attack that was over in less than a minute. Just unbelievable. The aftermath was, as you can imagine, immediate and chaotic. The incident instantly turned into a full-blown propaganda war, with 2 completely different stories hitting the world stage. You had North Korea on one side, claiming they were just defending themselves from so-called American hoodlums. And then you had the UN command on the other, reporting what they saw as a cold-blooded, completely unprovoked murder. With 2 totally different stories out there, the truth itself kind of became another casualty of the Cold War. The United States, they did not hesitate. The military immediately cranked up its defense readiness condition to DEFCON 3. Now, to put that in perspective, that is just 2 steps away from all-out nuclear war. U.S. forces worldwide were suddenly on high alert for a massive conflict.
So, what happens next? Well, 3 days later, on August 21st, the U.S. and South Korea launched their official response. And they gave it a pretty memorable name: Operation Paul Bunyan, after the mythical giant lumberjack.
And when we say response, we mean a response. Just look at the scale of this thing. This was not about just cutting down a tree anymore. No way. This was an absolutely undeniable show of overwhelming military power. The whole point was to intimidate North Korea, to force them to back down without a single shot being fired.
Get this, the ground force alone was 813 men. 813! They were sent to finish a job that originally involved just a handful of guys. You had 2 teams of military engineers with chainsaws, backed by hundreds and hundreds of heavily armed troops. And you know what? It worked. The mission was a complete success. The tree was cut down in just 42 minutes. And the North Korean forces? They just watched from their positions. Faced with that kind of overwhelming force, with jets and bombers circling overhead, they did nothing. Further conflict was avoided.
All right, so that brings us to the aftermath, which is actually pretty surprising, and it created a lasting legacy. Now, this is the really crucial part. North Korea's leader, Kim Il-sung, he actually issued an official statement of regret. This was huge. It was the first time, the very first time, since the Korean War armistice, that the North had ever accepted any responsibility for violence along the DMZ.
Of course, the 2 slain officers were honored.
Facilities were renamed in their memory. But maybe more importantly, real concrete changes were made right there in the JSA. They basically drew a line in the sand, separating forces from both sides to make sure something like this could never, ever happen again.
So it really makes you think, right? In the world's most dangerous, most volatile places, what is the line between something as simple as a tree and a trigger for war? The Korean axe murder incident is this stark, chilling reminder of how quickly the mundane can become monumental, and how a seemingly trivial dispute can become a flashpoint when tensions are already at their breaking point.